thevoicebefore-the-void.net. In a cave with a whale. From The Cruise of the Cachalot Round the World After Sperm Whales. By Frank Thomas Bullen. Read by The Voice Before the Void. Just when the delightful days were beginning to pall upon us, a real adventure befell us, which, had we been attending strictly to business, we should not have encountered. For a week previous, we had been cruising constantly, without ever seeing a spout, except those belonging to whales out at sea, whither we knew it was folly to follow them. At last, one afternoon, as we were listlessly lolling, half asleep, except the lookout man, across the thwarts, we suddenly came upon a gorge between two cliffs that we must have passed before several times unnoticed. At a certain angle, it opened, disclosing a wide sheet of water extending a long distance ahead. I put the helm up, and we ran through the passage, finding it about a boat's length in width, and several fathoms deep, though overhead the cliffs nearly came together in places. The place was new to us, and our languor was temporarily dispelled, and we paddled along, taking in every feature of the shores with keen eyes that let nothing escape. After we had gone on in this placid manner for maybe an hour, we suddenly came to a stupendous cliff, that is, for those parts, rising almost sheer from the water for about 1,000 feet. Of itself it would not have arrested our attention, but at its base was a semicircular opening, like the mouth of a small tunnel. This looked alluring, so I headed the boat for it, passing through a deep channel between two reefs which led straight to the opening. There was ample room for us to enter, as we had lowered the mast, but just as we were passing through, a heave of the unnoticed swell lifted us unpleasantly near the crown of this natural arch. Beneath us, at a great depth, the bottom could be dimly discerned, the water being of the richest blue conceivable, which the sun, striking down through, resolved into some most marvelous color schemes in the path of its rays. A delicious sense of coolness, after the fierce heat outside, saluted us as we entered a vast hall, whose roof rose to a minimum height of 40 feet, but in places could not be seen at all. A sort of diffused light, weak, but sufficient to reveal the general contour of the place, existed, let in, I supposed, through some unseen crevices in the roof or walls. At first, of course, to our eyes, fresh from the fierce glare outside, the place seemed wrapped in impenetrable gloom, and we dared not stir lest we should run into some hidden danger. Before many minutes, however, the gloom lightened as our pupils enlarged, so that, although the light was faint, we could find our way about with ease. We spoke in low tones, for the echoes were so numerous and resonant that even a whisper gave back from those massy walls in a series of recurring hisses, as if a colony of snakes had been disturbed. We paddled on into the interior of this vast cave, finding everywhere the walls rising sheer from the silent, dark waters. Not a ledge or a crevice where one might gain foothold. Indeed, in some places there was a considerable overhang from above, as if a great dome, whose top was invisible, sprang from some level below the water. We pushed ahead until the tiny semicircle of light through which we had entered was only faintly visible. And then, finding there was nothing to be seen except what we were already witnessing, unless we cared to go on into the thick darkness, which extended apparently into the bowels of the mountain, we turned and started to go back. Do what we would, we could not venture to break the solemn hush that surrounded us, as if we were shut within the dome of some vast cathedral in the twilight. So we paddled noiselessly along for the exit, till suddenly an awful, inexplicable roar set all our hearts thumping, fit to break our bosoms. Really, the sensation was most painful, especially as we had not the faintest idea whence the noise came, or what had produced it. Again it filled that immense cave with its thunderous reverberations, but this time all the sting was taken out of it, as we caught sight of its author. A goodly bull humpback had found his way in after us, and the sound of his spout, exaggerated 1,000 times in the confinement of that mighty cavern, had frightened us all so that we nearly lost our breath. So far, so good. But, unlike the old Negro, though we were doing blame well, we did not let blame well alone. The next spout that intruder gave, he was right alongside of us. This was too much for the semi-savage instincts of my gallant harpooner, and before I had time to shout a caution, he had plunged his weapon deep into the old blowhard's broad back. I should like to describe what followed, but, in the first place, I hardly know. And, in the next, even had I been cool and collected, my recollections would sound like the ravings of a fevered dream. For of all the hideous uproars conceivable, that was, I should think, about the worst. The big mammal seemed to have gone frantic with the pain of his wound, the surprise of the attack, and the hampering confinement in which he found himself. His tremendous struggles caused such a commotion that our position could only be compared to that of men shooting Niagara in a cylinder at night. How we kept afloat, I do not know. Someone had the gumption to cut the line, so that by the radiation of the disturbance we presently found ourselves close to the wall, and trying to hold the boat into it with our fingertips. Would he never be quiet, we thought, as the thrashing, banging, and splashing still went on with unfailing vigor? At last, in, I suppose, one supreme effort to escape, he leaped clear of the water, like a salmon. There was a perceptible hush, during which we shrank together like unfledged chickens on a frosty night. Then, in a never-to-be-forgotten crash that ought to have brought down the massy roof, that mountainous carcass fell. The consequent violent upheaval of the water should have smashed the boat against the rocky walls. But that final catastrophe was mercifully spared us. I suppose the rebound was sufficient to keep us a safe distance off. A perfect silence succeeded, during which we sat speechless, awaiting a resumption of the clamor. At last Abner broke the heavy silence by saying, "I don't see the doorway any more at all, sir." He was right. The tide had risen, and that half-moon of light had disappeared. so that we were now prisoners for many hours, it not being at all probable that we should be able to find our way out during the night ebb. Well, we were not exactly children to be afraid of the dark, although there is considerable difference between the velvety darkness of a dungeon and the clear, fresh night of the open air. Still, as long as that beggar of a whale would only keep quiet or leave the premises, we should be fairly comfortable. We waited and waited until an hour had passed, and then came to the conclusion that our friend was either dead or had gone out, as he gave no sign of his presence. That being settled, we anchored the boat and lit pipes, preparatory to passing as comfortable a night as might be under the circumstances. The only thing troubling me being the anxiety of the skipper on our behalf. Presently, the blackness beneath was lit up by a wide band of phosphoric light, shed in the wake of no ordinary-sized fish, probably an immense shark. Another, and another, followed in rapid succession, until the depths beneath were all ablaze with brilliant, foot-wide ribbons of green glare, dazzling to the eye and bewildering to the brain. Occasionally a gentle splash or ripple alongside, or a smart tap on the bottom of the boat, warned us how thick the concourse was that had gathered below. Until that weariness, which no terror is proof against, set in, sleep was impossible, nor could we keep our anxious gaze from that glowing inferno beneath, where one would have thought all the population of Tartarus were holding high revel. Mercifully, at last we sank into a fitful slumber, though fully aware of the great danger of our position. One upward rush of any of those ravening monsters happening to strike the frail shell of our boat, and a few fleeting seconds would have sufficed for our obliteration as if we had never been. But the terrible night passed away, and once more we saw the tender, iridescent light stream into that abode of dread. As the day strengthened, we were able to see what was going on below, and a grim vision it presented. The water was literally alive with sharks of enormous size, tearing with never-ceasing energy at the huge carcass of the whale lying on the bottom, who had met his fate in a singular but not unheard-of way. At that last titanic effort of his, he had rushed downward with such terrific force that, striking his head on the bottom, he had broken his neck. I felt very grieved that we had lost the chance of securing him, but it was perfectly certain that before we could get help to raise him, all that would be left on his skeleton would be quite valueless to us. So, with such patience as we could command, we waited near the entrance until the receding ebb made it possible for us to emerge once more into the blessed light of day.